Hello everyone, I am the Desert Gardener, and today I have 10 tips for planting tomatoes in your garden. So I've got my tea, let's get started. So let's start right off with tip number 1, and that's to make sure that all your plants are fully hardened off. Now if you're not sure what that is, I did a whole video on it, I'll link to it up top. But it's important that you remember not to put your plants in direct sunlight too quickly. They need to be gradually accustomed to it. You can't go straight from the grow lights to the garden. It's also important that you plant on a cloudy day, like it's a little bit overcast here today or late in the day. They need time to get used to the sun. And number 2 is spacing. Many people plant things too close together. Tomatoes should be at least 2 feet apart, 3 if you have the room. This provides for room for them to grow, as well as allowing airflow to keep them cool when it gets really hot. Now I don't know if you can see it, but I have a shovel way in the back there, and you might be able to see that I used a Sharpie and I marked every 6 inches with the Sharpie. This way when I'm digging in the garden, I can use that to measure things out to get my proper spacing. So number 3, and that is when you dig your hole to put your plant in, which I've already done, do not put fertilizer in the planting hole. I can't tell you how many YouTubers I've seen recommend throwing fertilizer in there. This is a bad idea. I did a whole video on that. I'll link to that as well. But you should not put store-bought fertilizer in the planting hole. We'll talk about fertilizer later. So the next one is to bury it deeply. Now I have my plant here ready to go, and the plant's only about 2 feet tall. Now it's a good idea to put 30% of that plant that is above the pot below ground, because all those little hairs on the stem are going to become roots. Now this isn't true for all plants, just tomatoes. So you want to put at least 30% of what's above the pot below the ground. We're going to bury it deep, and we'll do that in just a second. And the next one is to trim the lower branches, which I've already done. You're going to do this for a few reasons. You don't want any branches to be below the soil. That's going to cause them to rot and could cause problems. It's also going to, you don't want any branches resting on the ground, so you want to trim it up so nothing's resting on the ground. This could introduce soil-borne diseases and stuff like that, so you don't want to do that. And the last one is, again, airflow. Here in the desert it gets very, very warm. We want to get rid of those lower leaves to provide a good airflow. So let's go ahead, and that's the first 5. So let's go ahead and get this guy in the ground, and we'll talk about the other 5 in a second. I'm going to take off the clips. I'm going to take off the old stake. And I'll lie him down, massage the pot a little bit, pull him gently out, don't squeeze the stem, and flop him in. Now, this guy's a little floppy. He's definitely going to need some support. So this is a 4-inch bamboo stake. And I got my plant clips to help hold them up. And then we're just going to fill in the dirt. All right, that looks good. And we don't have to pack it down. It'll actually settle a little bit, and that's actually a good thing because the water will pool in it. So let's get to tip number 6, and that is deciding whether we're going to stake, cage, or both. Now, if you don't know if your plants are determinate or indeterminate, you should look that up. And you can easily do that online. The indeterminate plants will get very tall, in which you'll need not only a stake, but a cage, or better yet, a trellis if you can do one. Now, if it's just a determinate tomato, you may not need any sort of staking, but I like to do it anyway. It really helps keep them up. It gets kind of windy here in the desert, so it'll hold them up. Now, this is an indeterminate type, so I've got my stake and I'm going to do a cage. Now, I dug this hole really deep and then I filled it in a little bit. The reason being is that'll make the soil really soft and very easy to put this in. And you definitely want to put it in while the plant's young. Trying to do it later when the plant's big becomes really difficult and you'll end up breaking branches and stuff. There we go. That was pretty easy. So we got it staked and caged. And the next one is we're going to fertilize. Now, like I said before, you don't want to put fertilizer in the hole. You want to do what's called a side dress. If you're using a granular fertilizer, you're going to sprinkle it on the soil, maybe work it in a little bit with a tool, and then water. And it'll soak down to the roots, and that's how your plants are going to absorb it. You don't want to put it in the hole, it can burn the roots. Now, I'm going to be using a liquid fertilizer, so I'm going to do that now. There we go. And tip number 8 is we're going to label. Now, I like to use clothespins, stick it right to the top, makes it very easy to see. And I did a whole video on this, I'll link to that as well. And the next one, tip number 9, is going to be shade cloth. Now, I don't really need any shade right now because it's spring and I'm just planting, but come midsummer, when it gets to be over 100 here in the desert, we are definitely going to need some shade cloth. Tomatoes can't handle much over 100 degrees without some shade and some constant misting. So most people will recommend 30%, but here in the desert, I definitely recommend going all the way up to 60%, and I'll be putting that on later, and I'll do a video on that later. The next one would be mulch. Now, mulch is important for a few different reasons. One, it's going to help keep down weeds. It's going to keep the soil cooler, which will help keep the plant cooler when it gets really hot, as well as it'll slow any evaporation. So when you're watering, less water will evaporate. So mulching is really a good idea. Again, I did a video on that recently too, but I've got a load of wood chips coming that I'm going to be putting on here shortly. That was actually number 10. So we did all 10. A little bonus tip, number 11, and that's subscribe, because I do videos like this all the time. And if you want to be part of the discussion, let me know. Now, I'd really love to know how many of these tips out of the 10, how many did you already know? So let me know down in the comments how many you know, how many you didn't know. I'd like to know whether these videos are too basic or they need to be more technical. That'll be really helpful for me. And the next video is we're going to be talking about trimming our tomato plants and topping our pepper plants. Is it necessary? Is it not necessary? Is it just hype? Let's find out. I'll see you then.